I was 25 and broke when it happened. House sitting had become the only thing that kept my balance out of red, and on paper this job looked clean. 6 nights in a quiet place, 1 golden retriever, cash on the counter when I left. Still, from the first minute, something in me leaned back. The driveway swallowed the car. Pine stood close to the roofline. Nothing was wrong exactly. It was the sameness of the house that bothered me. The perfect beige carpet, the edges of the rugs aligned with the floorboards like a picture hung by a level, the way the books on the shelves were arranged by height instead of subject. I told myself I was tired and needed the money. People say to trust your gut. You learn to bargain with it when the rent is due. Victor Hale met me at the door. Mid-40s, careful smile, careful hands. He gave me the tour like a checklist. Pantry light sticks. Back door needs a lift. Recycle goes out Wednesday. Spare key in the clay planter. He kept his voice low, even though we were the only 2 there. Rusty, his retriever, pressed against my leg and stayed there. Hale noticed that and seemed relieved. He's anxious if he's alone, he said. You'll help. I'd done a dozen houses like this. My routine never changed much. I walked the dog at dusk, made something simple from whatever was in the fridge, wiped the counters the way I want mine wiped if a stranger was staying over. I checked the doors twice. The first 2 nights were easy. Rusty slept hard on the rug by the bed and woke when the crows did. I woke with him and put the kettle on and felt, for a few minutes each morning, like I lived there. The 3rd night, the house changed. Not the walls or the furniture. The air. I noticed it first in the guest room when I turned off the lamp. The digital alarm clock across from the bed felt too bright. It was the only new-looking thing in there. Everything else in that room had belonged to a catalog from 15 years ago. I got up, half annoyed, to tilt the clock away so the numbers wouldn't shine on my eyelids. The face caught a reflection, and a pinpoint winked near the top edge. Once you've seen a pinhole camera, it's impossible to see it as anything else. I put my thumb over the dot, and the skin of my neck went cold. I told myself there were reasonable explanations. Light sensor, ambient microphone for a weather app. People buy gadgets they don't really understand. Then I picked the clock up and felt the weight and the faint electric buzz inside. The angle of the sensor lined up with the bed, not the window. There was a smudge on the plastic where a hand had held it more than once. I didn't drop it, but I wanted to. Somewhere in the house, a door settled into its latch. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Rusty's head lifted and turned to the hallway. I put the clock back exactly where it had been and listened. The carpeted steps outside the room were slow, careful the way people are when they already know where the soft spots in a floor live. I locked the guest room door. The lock clicked but felt decorative. I left something in there, Hale said from the other side. He didn't knock yet. His voice sounded like it did when he explained where the cereal bowls were. It's a motion sensor for Rusty. He wakes himself up sometimes, and the app lets me check on him. He waited. I didn't move. I should have told you. I didn't want you to feel watched. That last word landed wrong. He knocked then. 3 light taps, more a signal than a request. I said I wanted to call him back in a minute. He knocked again, harder. Rusty stood and started a low bark that wasn't his usual I heard a squirrel voice. Hale told me to open the door, or he would call the police and report me for trespassing. That sentence had a shape to it, like he'd said it to a mirror before. I felt my legs go to water. I don't remember deciding to run. My hands were already at the window catch. The wood stuck, and I had to lift with my whole body. The screen had spring pins. I couldn't feel them at first, and my fingers went stupid. Hale's knocking turned into a pattern. On, off, on, the kind of rhythm a metronome keeps when a student is learning to keep time. I got the screen loose, and it clattered to the floor. Hale's voice slipped. Don't you go out that window. I went. I hit wet grass with my knees and felt mud go up the side of my jeans. I didn't look back. Rusty put his paws on the sill and made a soft sound I've never heard a dog make before or since. A sound like someone who doesn't have the words to ask why you're leaving. I ran to the road and hid behind the mailboxes. I called my mom and said I needed her to come now. And she did. We didn't go back that night. I did the normal things the next day, because that's what people tell you to do if you want your fear to seem reasonable. I blocked Hale's number. I talked to a lawyer. He asked me whether I had the device, whether I'd taken pictures, whether there was any record except my story. There wasn't. He said the word evidence 3 times. He told me I could file a report, that it might go nowhere, that if it didn't go nowhere it would take months. I said I understood and meant, and also didn't. I cleaned my apartment like a person who had lost something dangerous and wasn't sure what. I took the batteries out of my smoke detector, and then felt stupid and put them back. I held my phone up to the ceiling and watched the camera app like it could see through drywall. Nights were worse. Every house has a few sounds that belong to it. Mine learned new ones. Sometimes I woke because I thought I'd heard a door whisper, close in the other room. Sometimes a charger buzz sounded like the clock. 2 months later, I bought the same model clock at a flea market. I told myself it was an experiment. I told myself I wanted to know how easy it was to hide a lens inside the plastic. In my kitchen, I opened it with a butter knife and found the small green board and the slot for a card and the wire that curled like a sleeping insect. I took it apart, cleaned the dust off with a dry brush, and put the empty shell on a shelf where I could see it every day. It made me feel better, and then it didn't. Symbols stop helping when your body decides they're spells instead of trophies. One night, just after 2, my phone buzzed on the dresser. The image that arrived was almost completely black. In the corner, a faint smear of blue glowed on something glossy. It could have been anything. A reflection off a glass of water, a piece of plastic, a trick of the sensor in low light. I deleted it and emptied the deleted folder and sat down on the floor because standing felt too ambitious. I didn't sleep again until the birds started, and when I woke, I told myself all the rational things people say to keep their days moving. They worked until dark. I never proved what happened in that house. The police took my statement and handed me a number and said to call if I saw Hill again. I never saw him. That should have been the end of it. The thing I don't tell most people is simple and doesn't make a good story. Sometimes late, when the building is quiet and the radiator has stopped its small ticking, I hear a hum like the sound a tiny motor makes. It lives in the walls for a minute and goes away. I don't go looking for it. I leave the empty clock on the shelf. And when the hum is there, I look at the door and decide to stay where I am, because the door is not the problem. The problem is the lens you can't find and the person on the other side of it who remembers your quiet as if it belonged to them. It was supposed to be recovery time. Dylan had burned out at work. Sophie said the country would rinse the noise out his head. They filtered listings by price first, reviews second. The one near Ashwood looked safe. Porch swing, big yard, bland praise in the comments. At the end of the description was a note that didn't register until later. Basement storage room is off limits. Lots of hosts have weird storage. They booked 2 nights and added a third after the confirmation arrived. Leonard Keller met them at the door, keys on a ring that looked heavier than it needed to be. He had the stance of a person who'd been told to smile for photographs and had taken the advice too seriously. He pointed out the towels, the thermostat, the guest book nobody ever reads, and then the padlock on the basement door. Tools down there, he said, and gave the kind of shrug people give when they want to close a topic, without opening a fight. Dylan said sure. Sophie said of course. At dusk, the place felt like it belonged to them. The first night was the kind of quiet that keeps people in cities. Dylan lay awake for a while, counting the spaces between sounds, and then drifted off. At somewhere after 2, he woke. Not because of the noise exactly, but because sleep stepped back from him. Then something below the floor made a sound like a box dropped from knee height. Not loud. It learned its shape in his ribs anyway. He listened for Sophie's breath and found it. She was awake too. Neither of them said anything. In the morning, they didn't mention it. People don't like to name worries they might have to carry all day. The second night, the sound came back different. Dragging, slow, like someone moved a heavy thing from one side of a concrete room to the other and rested every couple of feet. Sophie sat up and listened with her hands flat on the blanket. Between the passes, she said she heard breathing. Dylan told her old houses talk in their sleep. She said this one was listening. They spent the third day out, coffee, a trail that looped back on itself, a shop that sold birdhouses shaped like other houses. Back at the rental, the kitchen air felt like it was holding something. Dylan put his ear against the basement door and felt a faint vibration. On the other side of the door, metal touched metal once, gently, the way a key does when someone practices not making noise. He stepped back. Sophie suggested they leave that night. Dylan looked at the $300 they'd already spent and said they would be fine. They weren't broke exactly, but they were near enough to it that pride had a say. Near midnight, Sophie stared up at the smoke detector above their bed for a long time. "Does that look right to you?" she asked. Dylan climbed up and twisted. The cover came off, and a tiny camera sat inside where a battery should have been, a green LED winking to itself. He felt the heat run out of his legs. Sophie found a pinhole hiding near the dresser mirror. Behind it was another lens. In the bathroom vent, a third. Dylan held the smoke detector in his hand because he didn't know what else to do with it. They packed without speaking. They left the lights on when they closed the door. At the gas station, the clerk watched them from behind bulletproof glass while Dylan called the police. He kept his voice as steady as he could. It still shook on the word camera. 2 officers met them there and followed them back to the house. Sophie stayed in the car while the officers went in. The front door was unlocked. The padlock on the basement door hung open through the hasp. One of the officers asked Dylan to wait at the top of the stairs. They went down together until the light from the hall gave up. The arrest, when it happened, felt like a scene that belonged to someone else's life. One officer's voice rising. A thud. Then Keller, pulled from a closet in the corner of the basement, sweat shining at his hairline. A folding table held a rack of small monitors, cables looped like vines. On one screen, the bedroom remained in peaceful grayscale, the bed made, the lamp on. Dylan turned away from it, even though there was nothing on it nobody would call obscene. The second officer bagged the cameras and the cards like they were just another kind of litter. Statements were taken. Forms were signed. Keller said he'd only been checking for smoke. It didn't play. He rode away in the back of the car, looking out the window, at the place he'd lived like the window belonged to him. By the time the taillights disappeared, the house felt changed but not better. The air that held a secret now held an afterimage. The rest of the trip was logistics. Airbnb emails. A voucher that didn't make anyone feel safer. In their apartment back in the city, Sophie taped over everything she could see. Laptop lens, thermostat, the tiny hole in a microwave door people never notice until someone points. Dylan laughed the first time because it looked like a kid project. Then he stopped laughing because he realized he was sleeping with the lamp on and calling that normal. A week after they got back, he opened his phone to an email from an address that read like a broken keyboard. No body. Subject line only. Remember Ashwood? He deleted it. He checked the trash. He deleted it again. He didn't tell Sophie. They switched to hotels. Hotels felt like control until he started counting the places eyes could live in a single room. He found himself facing the sprinklers when he changed his shirt. He flipped the TV around so the black mirror of the screen faced the wall. He told himself none of that meant he was losing. It meant he'd learned a thing and didn't want to be stupid again. Months later, walking home from the train in humid heat, Dylan stopped in front of a pawn shop because a window fan caught the light in a familiar way. It was the same model as the one over the bed at Ashwood. In the metal hub, a dark that could have been a screw. He stared long enough that the owner came outside and asked if he planned to buy the thing. Dylan said no and kept walking. That night, while Sophie brushed her teeth, Dylan's phone buzzed on a nightstand. The new email had an attachment, a 2-second clip of a ceiling fan turning slowly. The camera sat too close to the moving blades. In the reflection on the hub, he could make out a rectangle of a room and the pale suggestion of 2 people in a bed he didn't recognize until he did. He didn't show Sophie. He slept in the living room with the TV on, a thing he hadn't done since he was a child. In the morning, he told her he'd had a dream about the country. It wasn't a lie exactly, and it was not the truth at all. The worst part of what happened to them didn't end with the arrest. It ended with them not knowing where to put their eyes. Mark took the room on Crescent Avenue because the numbers worked. That's how he made most decisions since the layoff. If the math fit, the feelings could learn to follow. Ethan arrived with quiet voice and a cardboard wardrobe and paid a deposit in exact bills. They were civil in the kitchen, strangers in the hallway, ghosts after 9 at night. For a while, that was the best thing about the arrangement. The rawness didn't show up as a scream. It showed up as a chair angled toward the bed when Mark never sat like that, a closet door left open half an inch after he knew he'd closed it, and a glass set to the left of the sink when he put on the right. Most people tell themselves stories to make these things small. I forgot. I was tired. People are clumsy. Mark did too, until Saturday morning when his dust claw snagged on a black that near the seam where the wall met the ceiling. He thought it was a screw head. Then the light hit it and the dot blinked back. He climbed on the dresser. He could see the tiny ring of a lens housed in plastic designed to look like nothing. He felt ridiculous and angry at the same time. Ridiculous for how easy it had been to hide. Angry for the same reason. He pried it loose and held it in his hand. No card inside. Whoever had installed it wasn't storing the video there, which meant the seeing part happened somewhere else. His phone shook in his hand when he searched the model number. He didn't finish typing before he slid the thing into the drawer under his socks. He told himself it was a test. He told himself anything that let the next hour arrive without calling someone was a plan. 2 nights later, at 3:04, Wood whispered against Wood. Mark was already mostly awake. His body had been listening for that specific sound without telling him. He kept his eyes half closed and saw Ethan's silhouette at the nightstand, careful, like a person lowering glass onto a table. Ethan froze. Mark let his breath stay even. Then Ethan turned his head toward the bed and spoke in a tone people reserve for spaces where they don't want the neighbors to know how the conversation is going. "I know you're awake." Fear and anger climbed over each other. Mark sat up because the sitting felt like the only way to make his voice work. He asked questions, none of which were questions. Ethan said he'd suspected Mark of stealing. The camera was a deterrent. He said the words like they were lines he'd written on the inside of his teeth. Mark held the device up and asked why it was pointed at the bed. Ethan looked at the corner of the room and said nothing until that felt like an answer. Mark threw the camera into the kitchen trash with more force than the situation required, as if distance could break anything that mattered about it. He didn't sleep. The next morning the trash was empty. Ethan's door was closed. The landlord answered Mark's text with a message that had 2 misspellings and a promise to check the building for maintenance issues. Mark wrote a longer message and deleted it. The day at work was a smear of screens and coffee. He told himself he'd call a friend after dinner and didn't. At midnight, he lay down and counted the seconds between the elevator cables thrumming on the other side of the hall. At 1, footsteps stopped outside his door and stayed there long enough to have conversation without words. He didn't open the door. He didn't breathe loudly. The footsteps went away and left the air fat with their shape. People who haven't lived with this kind of thing ask why you don't just move. He did. It took weeks to find a place. And moving doesn't happen all at once unless you can afford for it to. Meanwhile, he bought a door wedge alarm and a cheap RF detector and told himself they were tools instead of talismans. The detector squealed near an outlet with a crooked faceplate. He unscrewed it expecting a hollow. There were only wires and dust. He told himself that meant he'd won a small proof and slept with the light on anyway. A week later, at 2 in the morning, his phone made the sound it only makes for files sent over Wi-Fi. A new image planted itself in his gallery. Black on black, in the corner. The faint curve of a lens reflecting the pattern of his own bedspread. He deleted it. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied. He told himself power grids. Do that in old buildings. He told himself every part of the story that could make the next hour survivable. When the lease on Crescent was up, he didn't renew. He packed in one day and left the things that didn't fit. The new apartment was small enough to hear the refrigerator door close from bed. He lived there quietly for 2 months. Then a small package arrived with no return address. Inside lay a camera body like the one from the ceiling, scraped and scuffed, heavy enough for its size to matter. It was wrapped in plain paper with a 4-word note printed in block letters. "You forgot this at home." He held it until the weight meant nothing. and then put it on top of the refrigerator because the high place felt like the only place that wouldn't change shape when he looked away. Mark doesn't tell people this part because it sounds like a movie and he's not interested in being someone's story. Some nights the new apartment makes a sound like fingernails tapped once against drywall. He stands in the hallway and listens without moving. He could call someone. He doesn't. He waits until the sound doesn't repeat and then goes back to bed and keeps his eyes open until his body takes a decision away from him. People think fear is spikes and sirens. Mostly it's small work done quietly. Tape over a dot. Furniture move an inch. A phone face down on a dresser. And a calendar that advances the way a refrigerator hum does. Steady. Ignorable until someone points it out, and then it's the only thing you can hear.